So then maybe we'll start with looking at talking about the recommendations. So I suppose to kick off, what would each of the panelists say is the main challenge moving forward for control of pine weevils, particularly as they become more of an issue in the private sector?
I think there's a kind of a movement towards use of chemicals, and the alternative, the challenge is to find other controls other than the acetopyramid and I won't pronounce the chlora one. I think that is the main challenge. I think you have to devise a that HMMS system does give a prediction. I mean, can you put knowing the life cycle of the thing, and I think getting that information out to people as well. The life cycle, if you're felling in February, March, April, do you need to treat the plant? You won't get fly in. So to know the life cycle, and if you're planting big plants, then you're felling in February and you're planting in April, May, at big plants, maybe you might get away without treatment. So knowing the life cycle and knowing the how and when you have to apply, I think is the main.
I suppose the adaptability then is one thing. I suppose they're coming out in March and they're going into November. So I suppose the integrated pest management around the documentation to contractors and staff, I suppose that's a big challenge, and to review that going forward as well. And then I suppose the non-chemical methods, either biological or physical methods, it's proven a challenge at the minute. So that is a challenge going forward as well. I suppose just one point there, Roger mentioned Coragen. Coragen is approved in Ireland, but not in the UK. So that's just a point of clarification there. So, yeah.
I would say probably having a suite of control strategies is the first thing. The other thing certainly for forest owners, and I'm sure for foresters as well, is to have costings for these strategies. It's important that people make informed choices at their management. So what is the consequence? What is the impact? What's the cost-benefit analysis? It's very important, I think.
Yeah, and thank you, Louise. So I obviously come from the pesticide point of view. So the big things coming down the line are the new sustainable use regulation. And as myself and John were just chatting about, the difference between a regulation and a directive is quite it's quite important, in that a regulation is directly transposed. So whatever decision is made at European level, it's directly transposed from an Irish point of view, whereas a directive, there's a little bit more flexibility for the competent authority to work within that. So then from the actual chemical point of view and from the biological point of view, it's all about how these are going to be regulated and how we incentivize companies to develop them and be able to bring them through the regulatory process, which is quite a difficult feat, but to be able to do that in a cost-effective way, but also ensuring that there is a supply. And from the actual chemical point of view, then it's looking at any new chemistry or old chemistry and seeing if there is any possibilities of using them in a different way. And then from our point of view, it's a case of regulating those. Thank you.
Just in addition to everything that's been said, I think one of the problems is the lack of knowledge that we have of weevil populations and what they're doing in Ireland. So somebody asked earlier about flight. We don't know to what extent they fly. I mean, in Scandinavia, apparently, you get swarms of them descending on sites in the summer. And in Ireland, I don't know. People say they don't fly much or they rarely fly, but flight is something that's temperature dependent. And so as we move into warmer summers, we might get, or May, in fact, it'll be the time when they'd be flying, but in warmer conditions, they may fly more. But we just don't have the knowledge about pine weevil behaviour and populations in Ireland.
Okay, and I suppose when we were producing our recommendations for the industry going forward for tackling pine weevils, something that came up in that and also today was the need for knowledge transfer. So to take this information that has been learnt in Teagasc and Cuilche and different areas, and how that would be brought to maybe people tackling pine weevil for the first time. So we had suggested in the recommendations maybe one-day training sessions. So I'm interested in the panel's thoughts on that, but also the audience, because you, the stakeholders, it would be what recommendations would be useful to you. So what kind of training do you think would be useful for the industry? So like stump packing, do you think that's a valuable training to put forward to the private sector?
I would say initially simple awareness. All the foresters are aware of this, but certainly it's my impression that many forest owners are not aware of, one, the issue, two, the extent of it, or three, the potential impact of it. So that would be the first part. There's a limited number of forest owners that are actively managing their forests. It's something that we encourage all the time, and certainly if they had simple methods such as stump hacking that they can participate in it and be able to feed back that information, it would encourage their engagement. Whether they're doing the work themselves or getting somebody else to do the work, the forest owner needs to be switched on. And just a small bit of effort, they have more skin in the game then afterwards, I think.
Okay, and then another recommendation we made possibly was to have a hylobius working group, like the one I mentioned earlier in the UK. And do people feel that would be valuable to have a working group with representatives maybe from the private sector, from Coillte, from DAFM, from research, that maybe would meet regularly? Is that something that would be valuable to the sector?
I suppose the answer to that would be yes. I suppose Coillte are involved in the hylobius research industry in the UK. It's working quite well. I suppose all together as a collective, I suppose we can bring new ideas to the table, and it works quite well with that. I suppose we learned from Roger today the hylopods. We're aware of that now, so I suppose without that being over in the UK, we wouldn't have known about that. So it's all about the collective, and I think yes, the answer would be yes. And I suppose from the point of view of the Department of Agriculture being on it as well, they could give us direction on chemical usage and direction of biologicals as well. So I think yes, the answer there from my point of view.
I suppose to go back to the previous question, I think the impact, the lack of information, and even built into any training, that if you don't control or have some measure of control on your weevil, you are going to have stocking rates of 12, 13, 14, 1500 stems, being lucky, and the effect that has on timber quality going forward, and the investment, the reinvestment, that I think you really have to appreciate that you do need full stocking in your second rotation, because when my last role during Coillte was reassessing previous, even with Coiltte's application and all that, sites that hadn't reached and maintained the full stocking, and the effect of the seeing stands with 1400 stems per hectare on that, and the poor quality of that going forward. So there's a long-term impact on any work, so that has to be incorporated into training, the future value of your crop.
Okay, so just to open up to the audience, if you've got any questions, I'll repeat them then if you have some. So just to reiterate that for anyone who couldn't hear, it's the challenges that's going to come when the amount of clear fells increase. And obviously the decision support systems are saying spray, but the labour that is actually required to apply those sprays will be limited when you have a lot more forest coming on the line. Does anybody want to comment on that? That's a very good point.
I suppose from Coiltte's point of view, Spotta, we've got out, and I suppose that's monitoring, and that's data that's coming back to us without any input on site. I suppose that comes back through into a database from phone coverage on site. So I suppose that's one area we're looking into, and that's early days as well. So that's one area we're looking at combating. And we saw from, I'll refer to Roger again, the hylopods as well is another area which looks interesting there with nematodes research built into the hylopods. So I suppose that's one thing that Coillte is looking into that, looking at the activity weevil. So yeah.
So that also to me leads into a question that came about earlier about historic numbers or recording populations. So we're not currently recording the population levels. I suppose after stump packing, there's no centralised place to put those numbers. So is there a need maybe moving forward for some centralised recording to take into account those new forests coming on the line? So that maybe looking back then we can improve modelling with the data that is being recorded anyway. It's just not being recorded in a centralised system. And of course, when you're talking about all these extra forests coming on the line that might need to be sprayed, being able to properly predict emergence and predict high levels will help target spraying, I suppose. So do we have any thoughts on maybe the need for some sort of centralised resource, be it a centralised decision support system that maybe has somewhere that people can input numbers, like a citizen science sort of a system?
Well, from my limited knowledge of it, what I would say is that if you're going to have a flagging system, it needs to be far enough ahead, as John mentioned. If you have a resource issue in terms of labour, the longer out that you can notify that there is going to be an issue, is the quicker it's going to be. It can be addressed. If it's a 2-year lead-in, that's one thing. But if you're looking at climate change and you're looking at high population numbers from the start of the spring into the autumn, that doesn't leave you with a lot of room. So the sooner you know about it, the better it's going to be. The other thing, of course, is that it's all well and good feeding information into a system, but what's the turnaround to actually bring the information back out? You know, if it isn't time critical, it's only a historical record. You know, if it to be actionable, it has to be either in front or at least at the same time. You know, if there's a time lag, I'd question its efficacy at that stage.
I suppose just to add a point on that, we're talking about employing insecticides, but I suppose that will be the same regardless of if you're employing biological as well. They still have to be bioapplied. So it's not just insecticides, it's really any plant protection product you want to apply. That if you're needing to apply more and you don't have the people, it's the same problem. So more questions? Yeah. I'll just repeat the question so everyone can hear it. So if you have a site, so Clearfell, that has high numbers of pine weevils, has that ever affected how you manage or treat other sites nearby? Do you put off Clearfell and other sites, etc.?
It's a difficult one to answer. I suppose, we would. I suppose the resource would, manage sites in that area, and it would feed back in. So a lot of it is based on experience with contractors too, and how they'd manage their sites, and they'd know historically. Would say, for instance, Kerry Forest would have a high population of weevil, and they'd manage their sites based on that. So. We would to a degree manage sites in Clearfell, I suppose.
So just to reiterate the 2 points there. So the first one is maybe the need for, I think you call it a RAG system. So instead of focusing on what's the weevil numbers on a particular site, it's to say what is in the location. So obviously what's surrounding a site contributes to the risk. So if it is surrounded by clearfells, it is at risk. End of story. And then the other comment is the need to ensure that contractors are also involved in these discussions because they have the real expertise in applying treatments and controlling for pine weevils. Okay, so then, okay. Okay, and then your third point was whether the information is scaring the private sector into applying, I suppose, precautionary insecticide applications. But then that kind of contradicts the idea of the RAG system, because the RAG system would say that the site's at risk if near a clearfell, therefore you spray. But then if you don't want precautionary spraying, then that system wouldn't work in theory. Okay, so we got some more thoughts from the audience or the panel on that, because that's several very interesting points.
I suppose from the point of view of Quilcha, they need a first aid manual handling PA1 and PA6, which is NPCT training as well, so that's a requirement as well. And they need the awareness of dip plants in the use of dip plants, which is covered under PA6 also. So that's from the training degree what they need. Then from the point of view, it's covered in the HIRA and it's covered in their safety statements also. So that's the degree of health and safety we use in Quilcha. And I suppose then the chemical returns in recording the operators involved in the operation as well is important for the exposure element to chemicals as well. So that's through the chemical usage forms as well. So PA1 and PA6 are the two main ones for chemical application, both dipped and top-up sprays. Yep. Yeah, so I suppose exposure, part of the trials are exposure tests on humans, and it's minimal the amount of exposure the chemical provides to humans. So it's like, I suppose, Coragen is a neonicotinoid, or non-neonicotinoid, sorry. So it's less susceptible to any environmental or human factors, I suppose. Yeah.
I just had a comment as well, and maybe Padraig could comment on it as well, on the idea of, not wanting too much precautionary spraying and this overuse of insecticides. I suppose maybe that's where the continuous cover forestry comes in as well. As it, in theory, would have less weevils and less need for insecticides.
I suppose you could say he would say that anyway. Yeah, if he all went CCF, you won't have a weevil problem. That's basically that's my talk today. Not really. The preventative method, as I say, it is a management approach. You'll ask the question: is there weevil? Yes, the weevil is in the forest, but there is. There is minimal. You just have the ordinary thinnings, like if you're doing an ordinary thinning, is there weevil going to affect anything coming out? So they're minimal. So you're minimizing. Maybe you're not eradicating, but you're minimizing the effect if you kind of maintain your forest cover and not create the scenario for the thing. And just one thing I forgot to mention when I was in talk is that, I mean, if you want any further information on continuous cover forestry or close nature management, you'll get that on the ProSilva Ireland. Just Google ProSilva and you'll get that information. So and
I guess maybe direct planting and hot planting and root diameter, all those things as well for minimizing and mitigating the risk. So we're kind of a good bit over time, so I might just take if there's just one or two more questions and then we'll finish up. Yeah. Just to reiterate that maybe a suggestion that maybe fungi has a place in reducing this need for insecticides or for maybe labour inputs, because I suppose applying nematodes requires labour, requires refrigeration, it requires a lot of water, and is something like endophytes where the fungus is placed on the seed before it grows. Would that offer some alternative? Is there something with fungus being done? And maybe Christine, you might have some comment on that.
Yes, we've done some work now. There are fungi that kill insects, the ones that Roger was talking about, where you can put them into a lure and they'll infect them that way. The other way that they can be used is by colonizing the plant. And so this is a recent area that has been shown to work against a number of crop pests. And we did some work which showed that the fungi can colonize pine and spruce seedlings. Now, obviously, the next step would be to see how long does it stay in them and can it actually kill the weevils? And we haven't taken it to that next step. And now we also did ask, sometimes there'd be a risk that if you colonize a tree with a fungus, it might reduce its growth. Actually, they enhanced the growth. So there's potential there. Obviously, it would need to be taken the next step.
Yeah, so I suppose as Christine said, you can apply the fungus directly to the stumps to kill the larvae. You could apply the fungus to the seed as an endophyte with the plant to grow, and you can also apply some types of fungus to the stump to make the stump the kind of raw or less favourable. Okay, so we'll finish up for the day. So thanks everyone for coming. It was great to have you all here and to hear our talks. And if you leave your feedback on the seats, it would be much appreciated.